Good morning, everyone. I know I'm meant to preach the sermon today, but I'm absolutely still gobsmacked by that children's story. If you could tell me how you did that, Tony, afterwards, that would put me at ease. Thank you. You know, as I was preparing to preach today, I was reflecting over life. Because that's what we're doing. We've been reflecting over life and the books on the experience of life. And it got me thinking, you know, and I want to put it out to you today. Does it feel like sometimes the worst things happen to you after the best times? Like you like life is good, life is going so well, you know, you're having a fun, you're having a blast, and then all of a sudden something has to come to ruin it. I remember the day I got my first girlfriend was also the day I first crashed my dad's car. And mind you, those experiences did go hand in hand. It was a real mixture of emotions. You know, when guys, you know, when things are going well for us, especially in the romantic sense, we get confident. We feel good, you know. We walk with more confidence. We talk with a lot more gusto. And we drive like, you know, we're in one of the movies. And so as I was in the process of picking up my new girlfriend, I ended up reversing and scraping the entire side of my dad's car against this white van. And so it wasn't something that was easy to miss. When you looked at the damage, there was a large dent on the side and there was this whole mark of white. And I remember getting home and just standing and looking at the damage, thinking, oh man, why did this have to happen now? I was going on YouTube and I was searching up, you know, how do you get paint off a car, and how do you repaint the car, and how do you buff out the dents? And I figured in the span of a night, because my father was away and so he was coming back the next day, in the span of a night, somehow, some way, I was going to become a panel beating expert. But then reality hit, and I called it as it was, and I told Mum. You know, sometimes it really feels like the worst things happen alongside the best of times. So what do we do when life falls apart? What happens when things don't go our way? You know, we've been moving through our Inside Out series, and as we have been traveling through these wisdom literature, these books on life experience, you know, we have looked at Proverbs, we have gone through Ecclesiastes, and these books have really been poetry books. They have been books that have been expressing not only some truths, but what it means to live life. And now we arrive at the book of Job. And the book of Job is quite interesting because the book of Job has the poetry of the wisdom literature, but it is so different in that the poetry is sandwiched in between a story. And the story presents to us one of the most difficult scenarios that we ever had to think through. And it begins with the story of a man named Job. I invite you to open to Job chapter 1. We'll be spending our time today in Job 1 and Job 2. And verse 1 to 5 says this: In the land of Uz, there lived a man whose name was Job. This man was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters, and he owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 donkeys, and had a large number of servants. He was the greatest man among all the people of the East. His sons used to hold feasts in their homes on their birthdays, and they would invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. When a period of feasting had run its course, Job would make arrangements for them to be purified. Early in the morning, he would sacrifice a burnt offering for each of them, thinking, "Perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." This was Job's regular custom. So here we are introduced to the character of Job. And there's 2 things that this story wants us to know about Job. The first thing is that he is a very wealthy man. First, he is spiritually wealthy. He fears God and he obeys what God tells him to do. And then it establishes that Job is wealthy with his family. 7 sons, 3 daughters. That's a big family. And in those times, having a large amount of kids, especially, 7 sons and 3 daughters, they would have thought you were blessed by God. And so Job is wealthy in his family, and finally he is wealthy in his possessions. Thousands and thousands of livestock. But then it tells us a second thing about Job. Or rather, it first tells us this second thing. But this second thing is the one thing that we need to pay attention to. It is the thing that establishes the idea and the detail about Job that we will keep coming back to throughout our entire story. And that detail is that Job is a righteous man. The Hebrew word here is tam, and it expresses this idea of completeness or even perfection. Job is blameless, as it's translated in my version. Job is blameless. No wrong can be found against him. Now, we can all think, surely he wasn't perfect, surely he wasn't this, but that's not what the story is trying to communicate to us. Job was a blameless man. He was righteous. And it wasn't a self-centered type of righteousness. It wasn't a righteousness that says, hey, I'm better than you. You need to be more like me. Job's righteousness takes into account the salvation of other people. As regular as his family's parties, he makes sacrifices for them. He intercedes on their behalf. He is upright, a man of moral standing. And it is this characteristic that sets the scene for the story we're going to continue to read, and it's found from verse 6. One day, the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them. The Lord said to Satan, "Where have you come from?" Satan answered the Lord, "From roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." "Does Job fear God for nothing?" Satan replied. "Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land. But now stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." The Lord said to Satan, "Very well then. Everything he has is in your power, but on the man himself do not lay a finger." Then Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. So immediately after meeting our main character Job, we are transported into a scene of heaven, a glimpse of the heavenly court. And this is one of the things that makes the book of Job unique. Because oftentimes when we read about heaven, we read it through the lens of a vision. Someone is having a vision, someone is being shown something from God, and they see heaven. But this is not the case here in Job. In fact, heaven is a part of the narrative here. Heaven forms part of the story. And in some ways, it's important that it does because it introduces one of the central issues within the book of Job. Because within God's heavenly court, we meet Satan. Or in Hebrew, Hasatan, which is a fancy way of saying the Satan or the accuser. And as Satan presents himself to God, God says to him, have you considered Job? He is blameless. He is upright. Once again, we are affirmed of Job's character, blameless, righteous. But as God is presenting the character of Job to his court, Satan levels an accusation. Does Job fear God for nothing? This is a pretty upfront accusation that is being laid out here. Satan is questioning the integrity of Job. He assumes that Job is only righteous because God has rewarded him. And Satan assumes that Job's righteousness is contingent on the blessings that he has received. And so he offers up a challenge to God. Take away his blessings. Remove his wealth, all that he enjoys, and watch him curse you. This sets the scene for the tension throughout the entire book of Job. Because it asks one of the most important questions laid out to us in all of Scripture. And it is the question, is God just? Is God just? And if God is just, does he rule the world? Does he really run the world on the strict principle of just retribution? Let me unpack that for a little bit. You see, as we've been moving through the wisdom literature, we have been building this nuanced picture of God. You know, Proverbs presents to us that there is order within this world. And it is an order that is established by God. It establishes that God ultimately rules fairly. And so it gives this picture of just retribution. Just retribution basically is, that all good and righteous people are rewarded by God, and the wicked and the evil are punished by God. And so all is just because we all get what we deserve. But then Ecclesiastes steps into the scene, and Ecclesiastes observes that not everyone gets what they deserve. Good people get bad things. And evil people sometimes prosper because of the evil that they do. There is something wrong with this world. And Ecclesiastes concludes that it's actually all meaningless. Serve God and give him glory, but at the end of the day, all that we put our effort to is meaningless. And so Ecclesiastes leaves you with the question, does God rule with wisdom and justice? And that's what the book of Job is here to explore. Is God truly wise? Is he truly just? Is he truly fair? And the accusation that Satan levels against God is that he's not. Because if God rewards the righteous with good, then the righteous will never have a reason to turn bad. And so he questions the principle of just retribution. So God allows Job's life to be turned upside down. First, he loses some livestock. Then he loses his servants. And this pattern repeats itself until finally Job loses his children. All gone in one fell swoop. At this, Job got up and tore his robe and shaved his head. Then he fell to the ground in worship and said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised." In all this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. Job loses all he has, all at once. It'd be hard to step into his shoes at this moment and imagine the grief that he is going through. It would be hard to look at him and explain the type of pain and the type of suffering that he's experiencing. Yet somehow, in all of this, Job still finds it in him to worship. Job still finds a way to praise the name of God. And in doing so, somehow, he does not sin. He does not curse the name of God, and so he remains blameless. And once again, we are reminded of the character of Job. This element, this detail rings out to us at every beat of the story, and that is that Job is blameless. And it's here that the story gets difficult to stomach, because the assumption that is presented before us is that Job did not deserve this. I want you to sit with that for a minute. You see, so many of us grow up with this image of God who strictly observes this principle of just retribution. That God is going to reward every good, all good actions, all good intentions, and He is going to reward all of that. And all evil, all wickedness, He's going to punish that as well. And we grow up getting this image of God that He is a micromanager of the universe, judging good and judging evil and making sure every action is judged accordingly. But when life falls apart, the reality we have and the image we have of God is often challenged. And the book of Job puts that idea to the test. Because here you have the most upright, the most righteous, the most blameless man. Someone who did not do any ounce of wrong, and yet still he suffers. This might make me sound weird, but as I came to this realization, it actually got me really excited. Because so often what we expect of the Bible is that we expect the Bible to present to us a nice, clean image of God. But here the book of Job presents us with a large tension. What happens when the one person who doesn't deserve to suffer, when the one person who doesn't deserve to have his life fall apart, what happens when he goes through one of the most painful experiences that anyone has to go through? What does that tell us about God? Can God truly be just? Is God really fair? So chapter 2 begins by echoing this scene, the heavenly scene in chapter 1. Satan is present, and God says to Satan this. Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil, and he still maintains his integrity, though you incited me against him to ruin him without any reason." "Skin for skin," Satan replied. A man will give all he has for his own life, but now stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely curse you to your face." The Lord said to Satan, "Very well, he is in your hands, but you must spare his life." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and inflicted Job with painful sores from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head. Then Job took a piece of broken pottery and scraped himself with it as he sat among the ashes. His wife said to him, "Are you still maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die." He replied, "You are talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" In all this, Job did not sin in what he said. So once again, Job is made to suffer. Once again, Job is put out on the firing line. And the question we all ask is, why? Why does this happen? Why does God allow this? It is the question and the tension that the book wants you to experience. Why is all this happening to Job? You know, we want answers. I want an answer from this. Why is this happening to Job? We expect answers. Because, ultimately, this entire narrative is so difficult to sit with. And the thing that gets me is that it's meant to be that way. I was so annoyed that I allowed myself to preach Job 1 and 2. Because when you come to this point, the question we ask is, how do we get any good out of this? I should have left it to Darren or Faye. You see, this is a story where all our assumptions are flipped upside down. Because here is a blameless man who has done nothing wrong, and yet still he suffers. But the kicker is, we don't know why. Now, we might think we know why. Here's the thing, the narrative can actually be tricky, because what it does is that it gives you all these extra details about Job. It shows you the heavenly scene. So in some ways, it tricks you into knowing why Job is suffering. We are given a vantage point from which we observe the story, we observe the life of Job, and we observe exactly why things are happening to him. But ultimately, we don't know why Job suffers. Think about it. Yes, we know the process and the decision-making process that happened, but why did God allow Satan to have his way with Job? Why did God give Satan authority to do whatever he wanted to Job? Why did God allow the way that he rules, the way that he exercised his authority over the world? Why did God allow that to be challenged? And the hard thing is that right now we don't have an answer. See, Job has gone through one of the most difficult things anyone has ever gone through. And even his wife can see the wrong that has happened to him. And she cries out to him, "Curse God and die." And the reality is, even though we don't see her much in the story, she is someone who has lost just as much as he has. She too has lost her wealth. She too has lost her possessions. She too has lost her children. Imagine the pain that she is going through. It's not just Job who is suffering. And she can see the injustice. She can see that her husband, a man who has done no wrong, is made to suffer. And so she tells him to curse God. This is the challenge that has come up time and time again through the story. Will Job curse God? You know, it's important to realize what's at stake here, because this challenge is given to him first from Satan and now his wife. But what's at stake here is quite large. You see, to curse God is not just to get frustrated with him. That's not what cursing God is. It doesn't mean we just get angry with him. Because here's the thing, Job eventually does those things later on in the story. Job eventually lays out certain accusations against God. But to curse God essentially means that we sever our relationship with him. You know, by cursing God, you are resigning yourself to believe that that relationship is done. It is finished. You don't want him anymore. You curse him, and so you're done with him. But Job doesn't do that. And again, I can't say that Job doesn't get angry, or that he doesn't get frustrated, or that he doesn't even accuse God, because as we'll read, Job is going to do exactly that. But what Job does here changes the entire narrative and sets the scene for God's revelation, because what Job does by not cursing God and by not severing that relationship, Job invites God into his suffering. Job brings God into his process. Job brings God into his pain, into his hurt, and allows God to sit in the ashes with him. And so the story continues. The scene is set for Job to wrestle, yes. For Job to cry out. For Job to accuse God, yes. But the scene is set for God to reveal to Job who he is in the midst of his suffering. You see, I said this through the book of Lamentations, but in Scripture, suffering is a sacred thing. There is a sacred dignity to human suffering. You know, suffering is a sign that we live in a sinful world, yes. Suffering is a sign that we are separate from God. And because of that, suffering is hard. But it's also the place where God sits with us. It's also the place where God knuckles down and sits with us through the mud. Suffering is sacred. And by allowing God to be present in his suffering, by allowing God to sit with him in the ashes as he scrapes his skin and reflects over all that he has gone through, by allowing God to be present, Job sets the stage for God to answer. You see, we've left a lot of unanswered questions here today. Why did Job suffer? Why did God allow Job to suffer? Does God truly rule the world with wisdom and justice? And as we open the book of Job, I won't say we will answer these questions, but we will respond to these questions. And some of these questions may never be answered. But there is still a call here. And that call is to let God sit with you. Whether you are walking in confidence, whether you are walking in joy, whether you are walking in life, or whether you are going through it, whether you are stuck in the mud, suffering day in, day out, let God sit with you. Let God be present in your pain. Let God be here while you hurt, because it can change your story. It feels like today we are leaving this story in an uncomfortable place. And you know what? That's okay. Because life is like that. I can't promise you that every sermon that we preach from up here is going to make you feel uplifted. sometimes it's gonna hit the real spots. Yet still there is a promise that we serve a God who, no matter how far he is away from us, no matter how separate he is from us, will sit with us through everything. My hope and my prayer is that as we walk through the book of Job in the next couple of weeks, that you will sit and be present with God too.